I'm Brent Wills, and we're at Bramble Hollow Farm here where my wife and I have been for 21 years now, which is on the eastern slope of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Bedford County, Virginia.
And you have a long history of dairy farms to soil conservation to advising other farms to having your own farm to linking farms together to networking them, right? Like what I'd love to kick off to start off with to get an understanding is just a little bit about your background. Like how do you usually encapsulate like what your background is?
Yeah, I grew up in Franklin County, which is one county south of here, and we did not have a farm. My mother and father didn't have a farm, but we had a lot of dairy farms around us. At an early age, I started milking cows for dairymen on weekends and summertime and that kind of thing.
On that.
And didn't really understand agriculture at that point because I was just there to milk cows and that kind of thing. Went to college and got into sort of the environmental science side of things. And but I knew I still wanted to be involved in agriculture. So when as part of my college, I actually went to England and was able to study at an agricultural college there, which was heavy on equine and swine, horses and pigs.
Yeah.
And so I got to do some cool things there, got to work on a farm there, and came back to the United States, finished up college, and I started a job in Botetourt County, which is one county sort of west of here, as an erosion and sediment control administrator. I was basically the silt fence guy. I was the guy that went out and made contractors put up their erosion controls, seed the job when they were done.
Yep.
And but I wanted to get into agriculture, so I came to a job at the Peaks of Otter Soil and Water Conservation District here in Bedford County, and started doing conservation work with farmers.
Yeah.
And I was part of that. I was also doing outreach, education, with school groups
even then.
and summer camps. Yep. And so I actually started learning a lot more about sort of the agricultural side of environmentalism and realizing that, traditionally we've sort of been told that there's environmentalists here and there's agriculturalists here and that they just fight. But, looking back now, 25 plus years, 30 years later, particularly the way that we farm and the way that I support farmers, it's really understanding the fact that there's an environmentalist really are on the same page. Mm-hmm. And unlike what a lot of commodity folks will tell you that all farmers are environmentalists, that's not necessarily true, but there are ways to work within agriculture to make it more ecologically friendly and healthful for the society that eats that food. So I had a business with some friends of mine where we did erosion control work, and I wanted to get back to doing things, more agriculturally. So I started my company, Will's Soil and Stream, which basically I do some environmental consulting, but I also do a lot of soils and agronomy consulting for farmers and growers. So that's been in 2012. We bought our farm in 2004. So I had been on our land here in Bedford County for 8 years at that point, and started to see things that not only didn't jive with really what I learned in my agricultural degree, but they started to make a lot more sense in sort of the realm of food production and feeding your neighbors, community support.
Right.
So we started farming here. We kind of fell backwards into it. We bought, a handful of chicks the first year and raised them. Then we moved to a couple pigs. Then we started having neighbors asking us to raise them for them.
Yep.
And so that's really how it all started.
Bit of an accident.
We went from, 12 chickens that first go round to the next year it was 100. The next year it was 300. The next year it was 1,000. So we just kind of grew, and I'm talking meat chickens here. Mm-hmm. It just kind of grew that way, slowly over time. And, we realized that we really enjoyed it once we realized that we were fairly good at it. I was fortunate enough to be able to build my business around not just learning on my own farm, but helping other farmers learn on their own farms.
Yeah.
And so that's really where the focus of my business has been for the last, 15 years or so.
So that did one of those things too, which on hands on one side, that is a very unconventional upbringing in terms of most folks I find have like a lens that they can see ag through or whatever else too. You have kind of like a lens kit of a bunch of these different perspectives. So the first thing, just to get a framing for and an understanding, how a lot of times we talk about this and it's like from farm to table. I feel like that leaves out a whole lot. So can you take me as concisely as possible from compost to compost? Can you take me from like, what are all the steps that you have to raise, you have to amend, what do you have to do to farm? And then where does it go from there? And then how does it get to that person and where does it go after?
Sure. So sort of in the context of when you're growing any crop, whether it's for consumption or whether it's whether it's grass or grapes or corn or beans or, whatever. I mean, really it all starts with the soil. And something that I learned early on in my soils business is balance in the soil is key. When we talk about balance, we're usually talking about sort of the chemistry, the nutrients. How are you managing those nutrients? Are you high in phosphorus? Are you low in potassium? Where's your calcium to magnesium ratio? There's a lot of importance that gets placed on that, whether you're conventional or whether you're organic or somewhere in between. But that's still only part of the picture. What I started to realize was that as soils become more balanced and as carbon begins to cycle better in those soils to produce a crop or forage for livestock, what happens is the biological component of that soil, which is every bit as important as the chemistry, it becomes more diversified. Because what you're doing with soil chemistry is you're actually trying to provide the best environment for the biology to thrive.
Right.
Because ultimately, it's the biology that feeds our plants. It's not water-soluble fertilizers. It's not silver bullets that we buy in a jug. It is the biological component of your soil that feeds your plants. And if there's low diversity of biology, if there's compaction due to mineral deficiencies or excesses, then that biological component cannot thrive.
Right. You get a hard pan.
If that biological component does not thrive, your plants are stressed. And stressed plants not only do they require more interventions on our side, but they do not produce as well. You don't get the yields, and you're spending way more money on preventing pests and diseases and things because you're basically working in a less than ideal medium, which would be poor soils. So the first thing you do is you balance your soils. Then you start thinking about carbon cycling and how the biological component, a diversified biological component, is going to do much better for your crops or your forages. Then typically what farmers do is they build upon that and they think, okay, well, I'm growing really good stuff now. Who's going to buy it?
Right.
So, farmer goes through the of learning how to raise chickens or cows or pigs or whatever it may be, or veggies. And you get to the point where I've got to sell this. So it really requires for a farmer to be educated about those systems. So then they can explain to that customer, all right, this is why my sausage is $8 a pound.
Right.
Versus at the grocery store, it's $5 a pound. And you really start to highlight the fact that the growing practices of the farmer translate so much to the quality of the food that they're producing. So now we're in the consumer's standpoint. We're looking at it from the perspective, and a consumer who's discerning and fairly knowledgeable, if not, maybe they don't know everything about farming or soils, but they ask questions of the farmer. They want to know what your growing practices are. Are you spraying chemicals? Are you non-GMO? Are you certified organic? There are a lot of labels that we can apply to that now, but ultimately in a local food shed or a regional food shed, it really comes down to understanding and knowing that farmer. And consumers, this based on experience and own expertise, consumers that want to support local, regional, biological farmers that are thinking about the whole ecology of the system as opposed to just how much they're going to produce, what yield they're going to get. Those are the kind of farmers that most people want to support. And local farmers markets, CSAs, farmer-owned cooperatives, things like that are a really good way, a really good tool for consumers to have, because it gets them out of the grocery store, and it gets them on a farm or at a drop point where they can talk to a farmer and they can ask questions. And, in my experience, if a farmer is doing things the way they feel really good about, they'll be completely transparent and they'll tell you about everything they do. In fact, they'll probably tell you way more information
than
you really want to know.
It is different types of farmer, but one of them is you can't stop them.
They're trying to make sure that you understand as a consumer why it's important for you to buy, not just from their farm, but to buy from farms that believe in managing that entire ecosystem as best as it possibly can be managed.
I've always called that too, is called the $5 gap. So, or the $5 gap, which is what is the difference between a $10 burger and a $15 burger?
Right.
It's a $5 story.
Right.
Right. And something that there's a new generation of farmer that that has expanded from where you just had to cultivate, and that was it. And we had kind of split up all the roles. And isolated them, to compartmentalize them. Now we're trying to do this thing where it's how do we bring them all back together, because that farmer, I mean, do you feel like part of farming, the job is to be a storyteller?
Sure. Yeah, particularly, if you're direct marketing. Because you don't have the benefit of a label, like say the green and white certified organic label. You don't have the benefit of selling bulk product, to one buyer, like through a large, company, for instance, a large commodity, buyer. You literally have to educate the customer on the intricacies of raising that crop or that animal. And it always gets carried along by the passion that you have for that type of farming. And that always comes out. It always bleeds through. And so when you're talking about the story, we're talking about food. We're talking about what people feed their kids. And, one of the first eye-opening things for us, and one of the reasons that we got into farming originally, was, we realized that we were responsible for now feeding another human. It wasn't just about me and my wife anymore. It was about another human, and how were we going to perpetuate their health through the growing practices that we already knew were right and were only getting better. And so the added impetus there was, well, we have a son now, and then came along a daughter, and it really hit home to us that yes, we may not, 100% of our food doesn't come from our own farm or even other local farms, but when we can prioritize that and raise it the way we know it needs to be raised, and we can buy it from farmers as a consumer ourselves, we can buy it from farmers that we and how they're raising we understand their philosophy behind it, that makes us a better consumer. And I think that translates to all consumers. If they're willing to learn about those systems, they don't have to farm themselves, but they at least ought to know when they're buying from a local or regional farm directly, they need to be able to understand those systems, because they don't have those labels. They don't have a label.
That's a conversation.
That's where the story comes in. The story not only replaces the label, but the story expands upon whatever label that farmer may want to participate in or not. And, I've talked to a lot of consumers that they would much rather know the farmer that they're buying from than they would to buy something from the supermarket with a label on it.
I've always found too, those stickers are two-dimensional, but a farmer story is three-dimensional. And you do get, you feel better about that too. You feel better about what you're supporting though too, but also you have to have an understanding in that gap we have now in the food system between those who produce food and those who consume food has gotten to like almost an extreme. mostly because of that vertical integration happening
Right.
in global scales. So when we're trying to bring that back down to, I know for a while we had, movements of local used, I think that word was used
Right.
so many times, and now trying to figure out too, like, well, no.
Right.
So in terms of that moderation of vertical integration, where do you find healthy moderation to be around that?
Well, I mean, it really depends on the farm. It depends on resources, depends on the market that's available to the farmer. But, we all want to think that we're growing, growing both in size, but also in experience. And I think, I think that farming, agriculture in general, gives people who are to grow things, it gives them or to understand those biological systems more so than they may have before. In other words, some of the most successful farmers that I work with are ones that understand that system a little better. That doesn't mean they're necessarily better farmers, but they understand the system better, and they realize that just because they have a problem, say a pest or a disease or some sort of problem, that's something you can always go and buy something to fix.
Right.
And they answer to that is the source of the problem,
Right.
which typically is some sort of imbalance.
Yeah.
Just like in our bodies, dis-ease, the word disease, comes from that when our immune system is compromised, or our diet's not right, or we're not sleeping right, or, we're exposed to things that our body shouldn't be exposed to for long periods of time. We aren't healthy.
Right.
And crops and animals and livestock are the same way. So understanding the sort of long-term, overall long goal process of, making the system work better, and by better, I mean more naturally, because, the ecosystem gets along just fine without us. In a, like say, take a construction site, you go in and you grade off, a construction site, and then they walk away. Say that they went out of business or whatever. Well, that site's not going to sit there bare for years and years and years. Plants are going to grow back because Mother Nature wants to cover that site. She wants to heal that site from the damage that we inflicted on it by clearing it. So that's when you have successional things. You've got weeds, then you have, shrubs, then you have trees. That's the way nature heals itself. So what we really try to do is to work within those same parameters and allow nature to heal itself as we reap the reward from what we can grow on that land.
Yeah, it seems like too there's intentionality put into that. That does take more time. That's more time consuming, which is not as efficient as we think in the short term and going for that instant gratification.
Right.
But there's this intentionality and that time into it, which kind of feeds into the fact that, I mean, for people like me and others too, like I want more in my diet more than anything else. I don't want a fad diet.
Right.
I just want more dignity in it. So as an example, I'm trying to find, for those that do eat meat, and not everybody needs to, but I eat meat. But I still want to know that that animal had dignity in life.
That's right.
And dignity in death.
Yep.
For dignity in my diet.
Yep.
That's how I look at it. But when I try to look at that too, it seems like it's either everything's going to kill me or bankrupt me.
Right.
Like those are my two options. So why does it feel like that for most consumers?
I think it's mainly because they don't really understand what it takes to that system and to grow ecologically. A lot of farmers, quite honestly, don't really understand how to grow ecologically in such a way that, not that you're not going to be providing inputs, not that you're not going to be helping, keep that system in balance, but as opposed to battling almost insurmountable problems with pests and disease and weather and drought, when you have a system that's more balanced, more diversified, then you are buffering against a lot of those things. So that inherently is, it's of a seeded connection to that food, whether you're producing it or whether you're eating it.
And then in terms of the backside of things too, like, so that's amending and being able to figure out say, the farmer's relationship just to that land. And then you kind of broke this up too in terms of that farmer's relationship to the distribution, the sale, right? You have to meet them somewhere, right? And we live in an age somewhat of convenience, where convenience is key.
Sure.
But convenience also seems to be killing us in some ways too. If it's done fast, done easy, there's a repercussion somewhere. You're just offsetting the cost. How are farms, in terms of that you've seen, that you've worked with too, trying to meet people in a different way now?
One of the best ways, I think one of the best examples of that is all the models that are out there now for direct market farms. You know, we've got CSAs, which is customer supported agriculture. You've got farmer cooperatives. You have farmers markets. There are all kinds of ways that farmers that may not be participating in more of a commodity, sort of a conventional type agriculture, there's a lot more tools in the toolbox now for them to be able to reach customers with social media and the internet, you know, and sort of the rise of even farm organizations that support farms who are doing these kind of things, farmers markets included. You know, they're very supportive of their farmers, and they try really hard to make sure that they're getting the word out. You know, they're not just setting up on a Saturday morning and crossing their fingers that people come. They're advertising, they're getting the word out, they're using social media, they're getting farmers to tell stories about why they farm that way and what products they have to offer and why customers should buy it.
So what opportunities, I mean, so for those that don't really know too well, but there are CSAs, we'll simplify it, but there are CSAs, there are cooperatives, there are farmers markets.
Right.
What is the difference, especially between all three of those?
Well, a farmer's market's probably the easiest because most people are familiar with that. A farmer's market is a generalized location where somebody has said, we need to bring in local farmers or regional farmers, and they need to be able to sell their product 1 day a week, 2 days a week, you know, whatever it may be. In some larger cities, they have farmers markets 7 days a week, but that's because they've got a lot more farmers to choose, you know, to pull from. But a farmer's market is basically probably one of the easiest ways to direct market, because you show up with a couple coolers of meat or a couple big bins of veggies, and you set it all out with nice decorations, and you've got some brochures for your farm and your practices, and you can talk one-on-one with the customer right there. Farmers markets work great. A lot of farmers that are getting into direct marketing for the first time, they will do farmers markets because it's a pretty easy step into that world. The second one I would say is a CSA, which means community supported agriculture, where you basically, this farmer at the farmer's market, you've been buying from them for a couple years, you want to buy more from them, but you can't necessarily make it to the market every Wednesday night or every Saturday morning or whatever it may be. So this develops what they call a customer supported agriculture, a CSA, and they say, all right, we're going to produce everything we can for 6 months. You, as a customer, you will front the money up for us so we can buy the seed, we can do the field prep, we can do everything that we need to do to get these products to you, just like we were doing at the farmer's market. But instead of going to the market every week, you have a monthly or bi-weekly situation where you can pick up a drop, what they call a drop, and you participate almost like the farmer does in the bounty that they have grown.
Yep.
So in the middle of summer, everybody's got tomatoes. If you're a CSA customer, you're going to be eating a lot of tomatoes, which means you can put up tomatoes. You can make stews. You can preserve. You can dry. You can do all these things to value add for yourself. And ultimately, what happens with the CSA is because it's bulk ordered and because you're fronting that money up front, then you're basically getting your products for cheaper than you would be from a commodity price. And again, a CSA is a model where you can meet as a customer, you know that farmer, you may go to their farm for a pickup, you may go to their farm for a customer appreciation day, but that's where the difference is with a farmer's market, even in a CSA, is because you can actually get to know them individually and you may not be able to pick exactly what you're getting every week like you can with the farmer's market. You've built up enough trust and a relationship with that farmer so that you know whatever they provide is going to be good.
Yeah, a deeper relationship. You can
That's
say.
right.
And then cooperatives.
That's right. And a cooperative, I think, is really one step further. It's a membership model, a lot like the CSA, but like in the cooperative that we're part of, it is basically set up as a system where you either take what is provided, kind of like a CSA, or usually most cooperatives will break their offerings down into different types of what we call bundles. One would be a meat and protein bundle. One would be a veggie bundle. One would be like eggs and veggies. And you pay into that as a member. But a farm cooperative typically also offers a benefit to the consumer in that they are a network of farmers that are willing to help you and to teach you about things that they do for their farm. Like, for instance, on our farm cooperative, we have what we call skill shares. And a skill share is where we invite all of the members that participate in our cooperative. Once a month, we have at least a potluck that everybody's welcome to join on someone's farm, one of the farmer members' farms. Or we have what we call a skill share, or we have a skill share or a potluck, basically. And a skill share is where we get everybody together on somebody's farm and we say, hey, we'd like to know how to make compost. So those of us within that group that understand and know how to make compost, we provide that information.
Yeah.
And we say, here's how you can do this at home. Whether you're growing 10 acres or whether you're growing 2 tomato plants,
Right.
knowing how to make and use compost is really an incredible skill. Yeah, it's an incredible skill because that helps you become more of an ecological grower, even if it's just like even if it's in a flower bed. You don't even necessarily have to eat, what you're growing. I work with a lot of people that only grow flowers, and they're not eating those flowers, but they're beautiful. They bring them joy. And when they understand that the health of their soil really allows the health of their plants to be better and it can benefit their plants, they look at that whole system differently.
Right, but what you put into it is what you can get out of it. And if you can just go for a day, go to a farmer's market.
Right.
If you're looking for a season, find a CSA. If you're looking for a longer relationship too, you can get into a cooperative. And I know within that Venn diagram, there's
lots of overlap.
Yeah, in terms of like...
and most farmers don't do just one.
Yeah.
Most farmers go to the farmer's market, but they also have a CSA, or they're also part of a cooperative.
Right.
Or they also have on-farm days where they invite the public to come and, buy product, but also do a farm tour. Walk around the farm, see how we grow our produce, see how our pastures look that our animals are raised on, see how we process, see how we value add, how we make bone broth out of chickens. Those are things that the connection of the customer to the food that they're buying and ultimately feeding their family.
Yeah, and I think you get a better idea too of like the seasonality when you join one of those. But that's something I do want to bring up too is what we sometimes call the weather CSA member.
Right.
Well, what role does that play for the farm too in just show up for those seasons as opposed to those that show up for the whole year? Yeah,
well, the way I like to frame that is like pretty much like everybody's job. Farming is year round. Even if it's the dead of winter, I may not have crops in the ground, but if I'm a good farmer, I have cover crops growing, where those crops are going to be grown next year and where they were grown last year. And by doing a cover cropping, for instance, that is going to keep my soil healthier going through till the next season. So that is going to impart health on my soil and into my plants for the next growing season. And that's not necessarily a tangible thing. That farmer's not going to charge you more for that, even though they put more effort into making sure that those plants were nutrient dense and as healthful as they possibly can. So it really, I think it goes back to the customer prioritizing where they want their dollars to go. Sort of that vote with your dollar.
Right.
You support the businesses that you believe in and agree with and want to see stay in business and be successful. And having those different models allows a customer to really kind of pick and choose.
Yeah.
You know, if you are sort of that fair weather customer, then, you know, grocery stores have produce year round.
Right.
It's not local. It's not even regional. It can be grown in another country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a trade-off. And given the fact that Americans in general spend less of our disposable income on food than almost anybody else in the world, including, you know, subsistence farming, you know, societies, you know, that's almost a slap in the face, you know, to the farmers that spend their life's work and energy and blood, sweat, and tears producing the best products that they possibly can.
Well, I've always found it too in that fair weather aspect that, you know, it is because those, I mean, during the summer, during certain times of year, it's when you get, look, the earth is producing or able to provide these delicious things that are coming out. The problem is if you're looking at investing into a farm, when it's going all year round, they can do a better job the next year of getting those delicious things in.
Right.
But yes, when it gets to squash and to other things, I think it gives you an opportunity, if you're up for it, to learn something new.
Sure.
To try to incorporate something else into your diet. Mostly I'm thinking about vegetables, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
But it's one of those things that when that jumps off and comes back, it leaves in this, it's funny, there's seasonality of farming, but then the seasonality of finances.
That's
right. And so how have you guys found ways to offset that, the seasonality of the farm income?
Well, you know, one of the things that I think one of the benefits that seasonality has, where you've got that glut of tomatoes in the summer, you know, that might be the one thing that would prompt a customer, because now all of a sudden they're covered up in tomatoes. Instead of, you know, you can't eat but so many raw tomatoes or tomatoes in a certain period of time. Well, there are tons of options about how to preserve and how to process those for using later. So I think what it really is doing, it's trying to come full circle back to sort of the old ways where everybody canned, you know, everybody preserved. Even going back further than that, the Native Americans would dry. They would dry fruits, vegetables, meats, because they didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have glass jars and pressure canners. So, you know, I think what it really does is it allows a consumer to be more connected with the food that they eat, because they're going to take a part in learning and doing the processing of it. And one of the ways that we have sort of endeavored to do that, one is by being a part of this co-op. Because that kind of spreads things out. That gives people a better option weekly, monthly, and year-round. That gives them an option where they can sort of pick and choose what's available, what they can use for their family, what they may not be able to use for their family. And, you know, like a lot of farms, one of the other ways that is we do have to have some off-farm income. My background is soils work, so I'm fortunate in that when I'm not on my farm, I'm probably on somebody else's farm.
Right.
And I'm working with them about ways that they can do the same thing that we have seen to be successful. Not every farm is in that position. I feel fortunate that I'm in a position where I can do that. But it's sort of opened my eyes to understanding that all walks of life, you have to meet people where they are. Farmer, producer, or consumer. And by doing that, and by understanding where they're coming from, and then helping them understand where they want to go to, you know, that really just sort of makes it all work better.
It's the ecological diversity leads to better food, but diversifying your portfolio, it enables you to be able to grow. So I usually talk about that sometimes too. Farms have to figure out their financial sustainability before they figure out to talk about ecological sustainability.
That's right.
It gives you the platform for one to do the other.
Right. And if you don't have a market for something, it'd be silly to grow it. We've seen in the last 20 plus years or so that the market for local and regional and sort of food shed based products is growing.
Right.
And it's not going to, I don't see it dropping off anytime soon. It's only growing more and more every year. There are more and more farmers that are, even if they were more conventional farmers, they're endeavoring to do that more. They're doing more direct marketing,
Yeah.
which forces them to be more transparent, or at least they should be.
Sure.
And it really enhances the relationship between the consumer and the producer, and it builds the model for both parties, because the farmer has to trust in the consumer, the consumer has to trust in the farmer,
Yep.
and you don't get that when you're buying produce at the grocery store,
Right.
or something in a box off a shelf.
Well, and then I always find it interesting because we do talk a lot about, there's producers and consumers, A to Z, but that 2 in the middle is aggregators.
Yep.
And on one scale, we have things like for the meat industry, we have 4 companies that control or 85%,
Yep.
right? 2 of them, Brazil.
Yep.
2 of them, I think, US,
Mhm.
right? So it's really interesting. And this is for the globe, right? So that's wild. But the aggregator role is also, I feel like sometimes it not always gets overlooked, but it is kind of a little bit invisible.
Right.
And sometimes that's a nice thing. They're just working hard and doing the right thing. And yet other times it's actually dangerous that there's not transparency
Right.
in that. For this region too, are there a lot of, because what I'm trying to get at is farmers individually, farming, doing all these other roles and jobs, you cannot be your own delivery system. You
Right.
have to have these points. For those that are trying to make it more convenient, how many options are there for farms in this region for aggregators?
Sure. I think there are a lot. Just the fact that 20 years ago, it was only farmers markets.
Mm-hmm.
Then CSAs came around, and now farmer cooperatives are kind of the new sexy thing on the block. And that is the farming community's adaptation to what consumers want, I think. And it allows, like for instance, in a cooperative, you are in a cooperative with other farms that are in the same boat you are, in that they need to market, they need to distribute, they need to grow, they need to have a consumer facing, aspect. So allowing or benefiting from having more than one farm, instead of the farmer saying, well, I'm going to do it all myself. I'm going to grow, I'm going to process, we're going to package, I'm going to market, I'm going to sell, I'm going to transport. Very few farmers can actually do that.
Yeah.
No matter what size or scale, you just can't do that.
There's not enough time.
And if you can do that, you're probably going to end up hating it,
Yeah.
because everybody sort of has the things they really enjoy doing and the things they're good at doing. And with a cooperative and even a CSA to some degree, you have the ability to spread that out over a group of farms that, if you're wise about it, you pick other farms that have similar philosophy, growing philosophy, marketing philosophy. And then that in turn just, it opens up an exponential customer base, because, now not only are you just selling chickens and pork, but now you've got 10 or 15 other products that you can offer, and offering those options for the consumer and the ease of picking up at, say, one drop point every month, that is going to eventually not make grocery stores obsolete, but it is certainly going to change the way that food is not only produced, but how it is delivered to consumers.
Yeah, it changes the dependency
Right.
on it, and when people always
And
go
it
for
gives
that.
more independence to not just the consumer,
Right.
but it really gives more independence to the farmer, because then they realize that they don't have to be dependent on that system. They can kind of do it their own way, whatever fits their community or their local area or their region, their food shed. They can really play with that in that sales area, that management area, and they can build models. There are probably models out there that they haven't been thought of yet.
Right. It's always funny to me too, because I don't even know where the term aggregation.
Right.
It sounds like it's just
Right.
food, but is that to you? Does aggregation distribution and processing, or is it just?
I think of an aggregator as being pretty much limited to distribution.
Okay, so that's that.
Yeah, because they're either going to a farm and picking up raw product, or they are offering a place for raw product to come from farms to be aggregated.
Right.
And then at that point, they either have their own, typically they're going to have their own sales and marketing into the business. So,
Would you say grocery stores are an aggregator then?
yeah, I would say yes, they're an aggregator, but you know, they're really beyond an aggregator, but in my opinion, because when you're talking about an aggregator, at least in my mind, I'm thinking raw product. I'm not thinking, all the stuff that's in the middle aisles in the grocery store.
Oh yeah.
I'm thinking all the stuff that's on the sides.
Stay around the perimeter and you stay alive.
Right, right.
I was thought.
So the processing is something that we as Western societies, decided generations ago that was of huge value to us. And I think that most of us are realizing now that was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that what's happening is the pendulum is swinging back
A little bit.
the other way, and a growing number of consumers and customers every year are finding ways to work more directly with farmers, work more directly with the original growers, and if that's through an aggregator, so be it.
So there's good aggregation too, and there's sometimes less helpful, let's just say. But
Sure.
where's that misconception though too? Why aren't just all these small farms going to a grocery store? They've already got a store set up. They've got the place that we can all go to.
Right.
That's easy. So why are you making it so difficult?
Well, oftentimes what happens with an aggregator is that as they grow, they, as a business in our capitalistic society, they want to reduce costs, they want to improve efficiencies, and they want to improve profit. So oftentimes what happens is they get to the point where they are so large that they are no longer buying from the same small seasonal mom and pop farms that they maybe started out buying from. Mm-hmm. And now they're almost forced by their own model to buy from larger farms that are growing of the same foods, the same quantities, the same sizes. They're almost scale in that situation almost requires consistency.
Right. Yeah.
Because the aggregator doesn't necessarily have that relationship with the end user. So they can't explain, well, this is why the chickens this month are bigger than they were a couple months ago. Or this is why we don't have eggs in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
They don't really have the ability to do that unless they make an effort to do that.
Right.
And there are aggregators that do that.
Right. On a smaller scale.
Right.
Usually.
The thing that bothers me the most about aggregators typically is as they grow, their business model changes in such a way that they're leaving out.
They lose.
Now they're losing the farmers that actually helped them get started in the first place.
Yeah. Well, and I find it interesting. It's like, why can't, I used to talk about this all the time, but why don't we talk about pigs and apples the way we talk about wine?
Right.
And wine somehow did that where there is value in the inconsistency of the product from season to season, and the terroir and the slope of this too. But I rarely find, it's only farmers, but talk to folks where they're like, the seasonality of like an animal product, let's say, earlier in a season or later. And to be very fair, the same thing about, like apples and other things like that.
Right.
Where it's just, we need it to look a certain way, and that consistency, I think that's where I kind of hit on, consistency can be killing us.
Right.
Because we want this, that's not nature at all.
Right.
Is not this.
Well, and a lot of it goes back, you mentioned terroir. I mean, a lot of it goes back to literally the soils that those things were grown on. Mm-hmm. What those pigs ate, what type of soil, how balanced was the soil that these crops, these produce was grown in. I mean, it has a direct effect on taste, aroma, nutrient density. Mm-hmm. I mean, it has a profound effect. And most consumers, I think, unless they are sort of steeped in this world of local, regional, food shed type eating, they don't even really think about that.
Yeah.
They don't think about the fact that, those are pretty tomatoes in December or strawberries in January in the grocery store, but where did they come from?
Right.
How long were they transported? What was done in the processing to be able to keep them looking that good and red if they were shipped from South America, to here? How, what other types of processes had to go into that? And not only that, but how many other people had to be paid in between there to get that product to you at the supermarket?
Right.
Whereas you cut a lot of that out when you go directly to the farmer. You cut all that out.
Right.
And even an aggregator is just one step away from the farm. So you're still better off going to an aggregator than you would be to necessarily a retail food establishment. Depending on where they get their products, the retail food establishment, I mean. But even, if a farmer's going to an aggregator, the aggregator is then selling directly to the consumer, you're still cutting out 4 or 5 different steps in there from the retail food market.
Well, and even those grocery stores have to figure out how to, again, kind of financially sustain,
Right.
which I talked to different folks about this too, but lead loss generators, how most fruits and vegetables, grocery stores don't make margins off
Right.
of that. That's how you get into the store, right? And the same thing to keep those prices consistent throughout the year where they lose or on that, but margins are being made off of anything processed.
Right.
Anything that is shelf stable that can stay there for a longer time.
Right.
So, the model's been built out kind of to, I think, convince that, oh, yes, you can have consistency. We're going to provide that to you. And it's kind of like, great, I don't have to work for it anymore.
Sure. What, I think is more indicative is I don't have to think about what I'm going to eat, what I'm going to buy, what I'm going to cook for my family, because I know I can go to a store and I can get anything I want in a can or a box.
Yeah. Well, this is why I have problems with certifications in a way too, because those are kind of saying the same thing, where it's, look at this little image.
Right.
You don't have to ask any other questions.
Right.
We've figured it out for you. And once you start to trust that, it can start off really well.
Yep.
It gains that value, and then it can just be misused.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of farmers that grow ecologically or grow biologically or organically even, they don't necessarily feel the need to have those labels. I know a lot of farmers that are growing organically, little o, organically, but they're not certified organic through USDA.
Right.
And there are a lot of reasons for that, but the majority of that is because they have a relationship with their customers.
You can answer that question.
And the customers don't need to see that little green and white label.
Yeah.
They know the farmer. They know how it was raised. They've probably been to their farm. And you can't replace the story with a label.
Yeah.
That's ultimately, I think, a lot of people have gotten lulled into thinking, oh, well, if we put we put an organic label on it, or if we put a naturally grown label on it, name your catchphrase.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, those are really easily hijacked by large corporate entities that have the money that, they can fight, if they're sued for, greenwashing or whatever, they have resources that most farmers don't have.
And there is a balance to be said for it too, because not everybody, whether you're in an urban environment or something, you can't get out to a farm. You can't get to know as easily. And so I get that. And there's new certifications that keep coming out more or less that are doing a little bit better job of being more specific on what they're doing. But it kind of leads to that same thing too, for them to sustain and keep going. Those are not usually funded and financed always by the government per se, right? There's third-party ones. But same thing, to keep something like that up and running and verified and validated. And in the same way too, going back to the models of things too, even at farmers markets, just because you're going to a farmers market, it does not mean that is, is it a producer only market?
Right.
Is it, because otherwise too, you're just getting that convenience in an outdoor setting with less refrigeration.
Right.
And you're paying this premium for something that is not.
Right.
And I've seen that a lot of times people will, purchase and then resell.
Yeah.
And so it becomes difficult to know as a consumer where to go and what you're doing. The only other area that we haven't really talked about too is on that processing side. So in terms of, for vegetables, you can process on site. There's not a whole lot of restrictions necessarily that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Wash
stations.
Yeah. And then bundle it.
There's food safety rules and regulations, but typically those only kick in when you're of a certain size.
Right.
And most of those are pretty self-explanatory.
Right. Yeah. Because otherwise, literally you'll see when you get it that it's all wilted or something. Now, for meat, on the other hand, though, a little bit different of a story with processing.
Yeah, it's absolutely different because, with meat, you're dealing with refrigeration, you're dealing with freezing, for long-term cold storage. And, one of the biggest problems that a lot of local and regional, sort of food shed mentality farms have is there's not as much meat processing. There's not as much, the number of processors is not as great, as it should be to serve the market. And one of the main reasons for that is because the federal government and the state governments, in sort of a knee-jerk response to foodborne illness, and people, being scared that people are going to eat particularly proteins, meats that are undercooked or not properly, prepared.
Mm-hmm.
The regulations for meat processing are incredibly stringent, and at this point in time, the majority of the regulations for meat processors they're designed for large scale processors. Mm-hmm. They're not designed for small to medium scale local and regional processors, which is a huge problem, because that means farmers that would provide direct market meats to their neighbors and their communities, they can't do it because there's no one in their community to be able to process.
Yeah.
The bottleneck on the meat and the livestock side, the protein side, really is the processing, because the government doesn't allow you to process that cow on your farm and then turn around and sell hamburger.
To anyone, right?
To anyone.
You just can keep it for your family, though.
Right. You can keep it for your family.
Yeah.
But any hoofed animal like that, you're not allowed to sell unless it goes through some sort of an inspected facility, which is inspected either by the state or by USDA.
But they are not funded by the state.
Not funded by the state. No, not necessarily.
You're right.
They probably do receive some subsidies.
Sure. And you have universities that have tried programs.
Right. But, but even a lot of your sort of backwoods, what we call custom processors.
Yeah.
They're typically limited by staffing. They're limited by space. They're limited by cold storage.
Yeah.
And they're seasonal too. In this part of the world, once October 1 hits, they're doing nothing but deer.
Oh.
They're processing deer in this part of the world for 3 months.
Yeah.
They can't touch a cow or a pig or a sheep, because they just don't have the capacity.
Oh, I know. It's like they're not up to work or something.
No, it's even seasonal that way too.
Huh.
I worked with a processor up in Amherst County who, that's basically, you call him and you've got a cow or a pig or something to take to him. He'll say, you got to get in here before October 1. So after that, I'm in deer and I'm doing venison and doing deer for 3 months.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so then that comes the prior planning.
Yeah.
That means the farmer can't just raise that animal. It's got to think ahead, okay, this steer is going to be at this weight at, 25 months, basically 2 years to 2.5 years. There are only certain things you can do with that animal after they're 30 years old.
Yeah.
Because of federal regulations. So you're dealing with a window there that requires a lot of planning.
Yeah.
And when we have the bottleneck of processing facilities like we do in this part of the world, a lot of farmers are just like, that's not for me. And they don't even think about the aspect of providing direct market meats.
I obviously been researching this for a little bit, but understanding why there is a bottleneck, what are some of the steps or how do we fix that?
Well, I think it's twofold, and I think one would probably usher in the other. I think that the federal regulations and even state regulations regarding meat processing are far too stringent.
Yeah.
Just like I feel they are for milk production. I think they're far too stringent.
Yeah.
And, not to get all, crazy, conspiracy theorist on it, but, I think we as adults in our society ought to be allowed to have more say-so over what products we buy from whom.
Right.
And the regulations just don't allow for that. We process all poultry on our farm, but that's all we can process based on, our permits. Mm-hmm. We can't do beef, we can't do pork, not for sale.
Right.
To our customers, even though we have tons of customers that would buy that.
Right.
And would want that if we were in a position to be able to do it. But because of the regulations and sort of the regulatory burdens on meat processing, it's just not a feasible option.
Well, and what I always get told is it's done in the name of health and safety.
Sure.
That is the biggest thing. Yeah. But that is the biggest thing that kind of gets touted. And I've heard these stories about, I've even had it with organizations too, where it's like at the farmer's market, like those eggs have to be in cold storage. Every piece of bread should be in plastic.
Right.
and I understand the safety aspect, but do you think that safety is coming at a cost?
It's absolutely coming at a cost. And, just sort of rebut that. If that were the case, if it really were all based on safety, if the regulations were based on safety, we wouldn't have 4 and 5 food recalls a week through USDA for, metal substances in sausages and bacterial infections in lettuce. I mean, if that were the case, we wouldn't have those, sort of through that industrial system. That just proves that those regulations really aren't there to do that. Those regulations really serve to keep a lot of smaller and mid-sized processors out.
Right. But again, when you're selling at that small of a scale, I think too, though, that doesn't allow for the consolidation of wealth. It allows for the dispersion of wealth.
Right.
And that is where, when you kind of get into what we call conspiracy,
Right.
but really it's just economics.
Sure.
So you can consolidate if you can vertically integrate, if you can control who is able to and who is not, and limited the number of folks,
Right.
then you're able to
Right.
kind of funnel that in, and it doesn't go back into the local economy.
Right. Well, and that's another reason why I think we're seeing a lot of these models that are coming up, because they're workarounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're, the CSA, the farmers market model, that's a workaround from the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
In Virginia, it's still illegal to sell raw milk,
I know.
even though a lot of smaller and mid-sized farms that milk cows, they drink raw milk every day.
Right.
The dairy farms that I worked on, which were pretty conventional, they drank their raw milk every single day.
Right.
I think that we're seeing, in Virginia, the rise of herd share, basically where you, me, and 2 other families go in together and we buy a share of this cow.
A CSA.
It's basically a CSA for milk.
Yeah.
Then we are, we're paying for, and we're members of a group of people that have ownership of that animal. So therefore, by law, we're entitled to whatever products come from that.
Yeah. And
We don't have that in meat necessarily, but we do have that in dairy, in milk now, raw milk. Mm-hmm. And I think that the reason that some of these cooperative models are coming up is because people are being tired of the government not allowing them to choose what to feed their family.
Right. And doing things in the name of what they're doing in the name of doesn't make as much sense,
Right.
because you end up having
Food
to pay the doctor,
Right.
not the farmer. You end up having to do these things on the back end.
Yeah.
And to be clear too, I think there is a role for, like, say, pasteurized products of some kind too. But when you eliminate the ability for anything raw, when you don't give
Right.
people an option, and then you also have a situation where it's funny too how it usually comes back to either animal products or animal byproducts
Right.
get that some of the strictest. So I don't think it's an ethical thing, because if you look at the numbers too, those draw in the most revenue.
Right.
So it does. I mean, it sucks kind of to say this, but you should have to follow the dollar.
Right.
And you can kind of tell most of this story.
Sure.
And then same thing too, though, in terms of the actual facilities and having some more of those so that you could get more access to, whether it is, I mean, because even for the milk too, I feel like I see it at like bars and breweries and other places. I'll see a milk stand now, and it's like that's where you can pick up for yours. So you can't go to a convenient location necessarily.
Right.
You have to find these other ambassadors and allies
Right.
in the food system, and that's where I kind of want to talk about the interdependence in a sense. But who are the allies in the regional, local, in the food shed?
Well, I mean, there are organizational allies. There are certainly early adopter farms and growers. There are now, coming online more aggregators that are supporting those farms to help them sort of get through that obstacle of, delivery. And there are nonprofits, out there that help farmers network. And, in the age of Google, you can probably find any organization or group that you want. But, ultimately, I think what comes down to as well is, it's the lack of sincerity in sort of the conventional food system that is turning a lot of people off. Years ago, we were being told that we had to purchase health insurance. But, and I'm not against health insurance. I have it for my family. We always have. But I think it's a little silly for the government to tell you that you have to have health insurance while they're still subsidizing food that they know is making us unhealthy.
Yeah.
That's a very sort of ironic thing that is not helpful for anybody except sort of the bigger players that can keep everybody else at bay.
Right.
And so, we have organizations in Virginia and in the Roanoke Valley, Western Virginia, that their whole focus really is to get funding and to create programs that allow farms to explore other models, whether they're cooperatives, whether they're CSAs, whether they're farmers markets, or whether there's some other sort, whether they're herd shares. They're organizations that really, that's their whole mission, is to do that. So that's very heartening.
Yeah.
For those of us farmers that have been doing it a long time and have seen, we remember when that wasn't the case, and we've seen that, rise in interest, and it's not just pushed by the farmers, but it's really being pushed by consumers.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something I always try to remind people, but welcome to the modern food system where everything's either going to kill you or bankrupt you.
Right.
Let's get started.
Right.
So if they were getting started on that journey and they had a question for you, where would they find you?
Well, we have a website, bramblehallowfarm.com, and through our cooperative, which is called Edible Goose Creek. So ediblegoosecreek.com, that gives a lot of information about our cooperative, the farms that we work with, our distribution, the bundles that we offer, and the times of year, as well as the sort of the social aspect of it, the potlucks that we do, the skill shares that we do. You can Google those and find us. There are also, in a lot of localities, particularly that have seen a rise in local and regional farming and direct marketing, most of them have some sort of a food guide.
Yeah.
Where you can either download it or it's a hard paper copy, where you can go on there and say, yeah, look, in my part of the state, here are the farms that are doing these products, and here's their phone number, here's their email address. These days, even the most Luddite farmers, have a way to contact.
Yeah.
They have a Facebook page, they have a website. I mean, they at least have a phone number.
Right.
So, what I like to tell that are asking questions about this is, it's really upon you and how serious you are about changing the way you eat. Because anybody can go to the grocery store, and anybody can go to the grocery store every day, or go out to eat processed foods, eat convenience store foods. Anybody can do that in this country anytime they want. But it takes a little bit of know-how and a little bit of want to be to find those farms and those organizations that are giving farmers those opportunities to reach more people. And really, if you care about your community, then having local farms that are growing ecologically, that are selling locally, that are truly passionate about food production beyond just the bins and bushels that they're filling. That, and we've seen it. We see it now. Look at the Midwest. Look at the rural towns in the Midwest that were booming 50 years ago because of agriculture.
Yep.
Now they're ghost towns.
Yeah.
Nobody's left. If you want to have a vibrant community, and not even talking about the money that gets circulated.
No, right.
The percentage of the consumer dollar that stays in your community when you buy from a local farmer or a local aggregator it's just incredible, the difference. When you buy anything from a big box store, it goes back to their headquarters.
Right.
Whether it's Arkansas or Texas or whatever, wherever it be, it doesn't stay locally. But when you come to my farm or you buy from my cooperative, the majority of that money is going to circulate again in that community. And it just provides much more of a benefit for everyone within the food shed that otherwise not there.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see again another movement. We always have this cities kind of fill up, and then they empty out back to the land movement. Sometimes people are running tours, sometimes people are running away from.
That's right.
But either way, I think we're seeing a cusp of a new diaspora.
Yep.
People wanting to move out to an area, and part of this is also not, repelling against it, but how do you welcome new neighbors? How do you invite people in to say, hey, we're happy to have you here. This
Yep.
is what we're proud of.
Right.
And it sounds like a lot of the things that you're kind of promoting or talking about hit on those things. But in your own words, what are you most proud of for farmers in this area?
I mean, I'm really proud of the network of farmers that's been built by farmers and those organizations that support them. But I'm really excited about the fortitude. What I had coach in high school had said, the stick-to-itiveness of a lot of the farms, because
Love that.
They're passionate about it, they're doing a good job, and they may have reached their maximum scale. They may not want to scale up anymore, but they want to keep doing what they're doing. So they find ways, whether it's through different models, through different markets, they find ways to be able to do that. And, in the last 20 years, we've seen that complexion change a lot, in our food shed. And, just the fact that we're using the term food shed means that we've come a long way into explaining to people how important that is.
Yeah.
Local, regional, they carry weight. But when you talk about a food shed, obviously that's a takeoff on a watershed. And someone who used to do a lot of water education, the watershed was the basis for everything, because everything flows downstream. So for a food shed, for the public to understand how important their food shed is and how important it is to support farmers that are in their food shed, I mean, it's only going to make the community stronger.
Yeah. Well, I honestly know how you've been doing this for as long as you have, how your stick-to-itiveness has stuck, but also
Stubborn.
Well, a little bit of that, but it's in conjunction with, you speak language of the land. You also translate that for others, and you welcome people in. You have crusty.
Sure.
So I really, I kind of what you've done over the years and what you're going to do in the years ahead. And people want to find you. It's BrambleHollow.com.
Or EdibleGooseCreek.com.
And every January they can find you where?
Every January they can find me at a winter farm conference. The Virginia Association for Biological Farming.
Right. Or right down the road in Roanoke.
It is for these few years. It'll probably move again elsewhere in Virginia, but we've had a really good thing going with the Hotel Roanoke. They've about buying from local farms through our conference experience. So I'm really proud of that, because actually there are a lot of farms in our food shed that are now selling to Hotel Roanoke year round.
Yeah.
They're not just doing it for their winter conference.
I remember we went into and the food here today.
Right.
It was all the farm.
Yeah.
And I've been telling people this for years since I moved out to the area too. That's the best meeting that we have in this state for farmers, food systems, whatever else, is that conference. And it's funny, for sometimes it felt like an education center thing. Other times it's really just felt like an alumni kind of event. Like you get everybody that you don't get to see all year long.
It's networking, it's learning, and it's teaching. We do that. Everybody there does a little bit of that. When they're, whether you're a paid speaker or a keynote, or on the staff, or you're just a participant, people are learning from you as you talk to them in the hallways, over lunch. And that's one of the reasons why I got involved with that organization 10 plus years ago, was because I believe in that. I believe in the movement. I believe in feeding people high quality food. And, if the current's not going to give that to us, then we're going to figure out a way to give it to ourselves.
Yep. Well, I dig it. Keep it up.
Yeah,
Thank
man.
you.